Hello.
Hello, welcome everybody.
Good to see you all. Thank you so much for being here.
Welcome everyone to what is the final episode of our Designing Regenerative Change webinar series. So whether you're just joining us today or you've been following us along, this is the final part in kind of a cycle that we have explored together. We've been looking at how you can weave regenerative principles and methodologies into your design process, whatever your work is. But within the context of Realliance's niche, which is really people who are involved in regenerative work in the context of kind of where humanitarian and development work are overlap and the kind of topics that they cover, things like disasters, displacement, pressurized kind of contexts and environments. So that's really the world that we're coming from, and in each episode we've had the kind of theory and ideas that we've discussed rooted in real world examples from Realliance members. Today will be no different. But if you are joining us for the first time, you might want to consider going back a few episodes and joining us through the whole process. We have kind of used our own words and our own framing for this process. So we start with kind of the visioning stage, and we've got activities that you can follow along with at each stage as well. So welcome. If you're joining us for the first time, there's still a lot to learn from our guest today, and we're going to be talking about adapting to crises. As I mentioned, Realliance, we're a network of regenerative practitioners, and really that is our kind of core guiding theme, how to operate and bring in these regenerative approaches when you are in challenging contexts that are ever-changing, as so many of us are.
Exactly. And a number of our members, and this process is inspired by regenerative movements like permaculture or regenerative agriculture, agroecology, and throughout this series, like Jackie said, the language that we've used is maybe somewhat unique. It's not necessarily taken from any one of these movements, but inspired by all of them. But something that I found really useful along the process is learning from a number of our members that we've introduced each episode, and really sinking into this idea that actually the process itself is almost, some of the most important bits, which I think it's, like you said, Jackie, if you haven't watched the series yet, please feel free to go back and dip into the whole series, because actually sinking into this idea of process being almost as important as outcomes, or maybe even more important than outcomes, because the way that we're working actually helps to deliver what we want to achieve in the world. And I think this episode is no different in the sense that we're always learning and always adapting to the way that we work and the context that we're in. So I think this is really interesting in this episode to think, okay, we've gone through this process of designing and implementing a regenerative project, but actually we're in an ever-changing world with ever-changing context. So what happens now? Do we just drop it all and start again? Probably not. Probably it's about adapting to this context and changing the work maybe, but always changing and being open to the evolution of the work. Yeah.
I think that's so important. I think even if you are not operating in a escalating or pressurized environment, there's a lot to be said for having a plan on paper and then translating that into the real world. So I think whether you feel that kind of crisis or these ever-changing environments is applicable to you or not, that you always need to be adaptable. Something's going to happen.
Exactly.
So I think it's still really, really valuable to incorporate adaptability throughout the entirety of your plan.
Exactly. And I also think something to touch on here is also the political nature of this work, because we can't divorce our work from the wider context. We have to adapt to our context, of course, but also there are many situations like which we've been seeing very recently as well too, where we need to put pressure on the political sphere as well too, on our governments and on corporations and other actors who are oppressing folk as well. So also thinking of the political sphere and how we can take this work beyond just us and help use this to elevate voices of, you know, those who are fighting for social justice and the freedom and rights of people as well too.
I think that's a really nice point that you've made, because I think adapting to crisis almost sounds a bit like we just have to make do with what the context and the environment is. But as we've mentioned throughout each stage, the reason that we're putting such emphasis on having a design and having a plan is taking that moment to look at the wider picture. And, you know, throughout so many regenerative movements, like take, you know, agroecology, for example, peasant rights movements, a lot of, you know, having that wider view encapsulates things like rights and what you can do to engage with the political and change the context that you're working in, and not just kind of resolve yourself to kind of putting your head down and working on the what's immediately in front of you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not about burying our heads in the sand and saying, okay, well, you know, crisis is here, let's move on. It's about, you know, what I think we're going to dive a bit into in our conversation with wonderful Realigns member Jehane from Farms Not Arms about systems thinking. But I think part of what regeneration and regenerative movements can offer us is seeing the wider picture of seeing how are all these forces at play connected, and I think you're right. You know, we can't divorce our work from the political sphere as well too. We have to see the wider picture and the wider forces at play as well. But I think without further ado, it would be really wonderful to welcome our guest for today. So thank you so much for being with us. We're really grateful to welcome Jehane Akiki from Farms Not Arms, who works in Lebanon. So Jehane, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a pleasure to chat with you. And first of all, could you tell us a bit about your work at Farms Not Arms and what you do and the context that you're working in?
Hi, my name is Jehane Akiki, and I'm the founder of Farms Not Arms. At Farms Not Arms, we're a collective of individuals and organizations who started working together collaboratively in order to design a long-term solution for food security, climate change, and social cohesion. So with our work, we actually did not start with a project and a goal in mind, but we started by understanding challenges and by understanding the problems that are being faced in Lebanon specifically, while starting with Lebanon, but also with the goal of building a scalable solution that could then be tailored and adapted to different places based on our process. So our process is rooted in design thinking and systems thinking, which is a form of creative problem solving that takes into account that puts the communities and the local community and the local ecosystem that you're working in front and center to understand what are people going through, what are the problems they're facing, and also with the systems thinking and systems design to understand the wider context, the different factors that could influence whatever intervention or project or solution that you end up implementing on the ground. So this being said, we embarked on a design thinking process. So actually, Farms Not Arms is a collective of individuals that are between the US and Lebanon. So the initial work that we did was to really immerse ourselves in the Lebanese context, to understand agriculture in Lebanon, and to also understand how refugees play in, the role that refugees have when it comes to the local agricultural system, but also where they get their food from, how they work in agriculture, and all of that. So we did do design thinking, more formal design thinking sprints in Lebanon with refugees and local communities to really map out those challenges. So some of the challenges that we're facing are, one, food insecurity and the fact that a lot of both refugees and local communities don't really have access to a lot of food, especially right now when Lebanon is facing a massive economic crisis. And this goes back to the fact that 85% of food in Lebanon is imported. So the local agricultural ecosystem is very weak, and it's like a very small part of the actual food consumption and availability in Lebanon. So also, just like everywhere in the world, we are having, soil degradation problems. And specific to Lebanon, in agriculture and beyond, there's a lot of tension between the refugees and the host communities, because there's this negative view that refugees are taking away resources, when it's not really the case. The problems are much more systemic and stem from a lot of government policies that have weakened the food sector and other local production. So this being said, the main challenge that we are targeting is this food insecurity, but doing it in a way that actually we wanted to have access to more nutritious food, to more locally produced food, and a lot of diverse food and nutritious food. So we didn't want to just, have a solution to food insecurity be, canned products or something like that. And the second is regeneration. So we realized that it's, not just in Lebanon, but everywhere, it's a very pressing problem. And we wanted to make sure that we actually work on this wider ecosystem restoration while we target food. And the third, as I mentioned, is social cohesion. So we realized that in Lebanon specifically, we have to target an inclusive, regenerative food production model. And if we do something that's just for refugees, it's going to cause problems. If we do something that's just for Lebanese, it also is going to cause problems, and it would not take into account most of the agricultural workforce. So yeah, these are some of our challenges that we're targeting. At the same time, as we work in this environment, we're working against the backdrop of worsening economic and financial crisis that is something that we're constantly adapting to.
Thanks for such a wonderful introduction, Jehane. And I noticed you mentioned that a design process is really central to your work. So I wanted to ask a bit more about that. You're obviously working in an ever-changing and somewhat escalating context. How do you embed adaptability into the core of your work?
So we actually did a lot of the design thinking work before or at the start of the Lebanese economic crisis. So in 2020, Lebanon started facing like a massive economic crisis where the currency that had been pegged to the dollar started devaluing and was in free fall. So that really affected the wider ecosystem. And we, in 2020, is when we actually started our implementation and had finished, a lot of the design. Well, we started early 2021, but in 2020 we were, starting to do a lot of the setup. So in our previous design thinking process, one of the guiding factors was to really put the local community first, and to really make sure that we have the right local team and local stakeholders, and just to have a really strong local base on the ground. And this has been what has really helped us adapt to different changes, because one of the things about working in, a very like fickle and unpredictable environment is that it's very difficult to do long-term planning, to say, okay, in 5 years we're going to be there, because we don't even know, what the currency will be like. We don't even know if there's going to be electricity. We don't even know, if the government is going to be sending refugees back to Syria, which is what's slowly been happening. So the way we navigate that is we make sure that the local team that are, running our farm, they have the agency to point out what is happening on day to day, and then to let me know. And then a lot of the decision making happens from like the local up, rather than, just what we think should happen, but more related to what's actually happening on the ground and really acting quickly based on that. So for example, we've had one of the problems we faced in 2021 is all of a sudden in Lebanon there was no more fuel. And so this impacted a lot of our operations, because we need to get around, we need to do a lot of things. So we basically let the people on the ground be like, okay, you know, this is how much we have to pay for that. This is how much this is who we can use their support to help us. So there was a lot of just depending on local networks and on how things are actually on the ground. And I think that with any kind of design process, it's really about understanding the user. So this has to always be the focus, and you know what we think should happen should not take precedence over what the people on the ground actually think is best.
Well, thank you so much, Jehane, for sharing. And I loved what you were talking about in terms of the governance of your organization and the work and the dispersed decision making. I thought that was really powerful, and I think I love how you say it helps with the adaptability if decision making is dispersed. So could you tell us a bit about this? How did you put this dispersed decision making into practice?
Yeah, I really do believe that, you know, this dispersed or decentralized way of decision making is key in a lot of, you know, regenerative projects. And for us, we're a small team, so it's a bit easier to do that. But I do think that having a more of like a horizontal hierarchy, let's say, you know, where it's not even though we have a lot of like reporting teams, meetings, and we do a lot of, you know, like I'm always in the know about what's happening. I'm not always on the ground. So our farm manager on the ground, you know, and a lot of the day to day, she makes a lot of decisions without having to go back to me and get, you know, approval. But I think that part of ensuring that happens is one, finding the right and competent people to be in certain positions, you know, so having someone who's like a subject matter expert or who knows a lot about the what they're doing, but also who is connected locally, who knows how to make things work, I think is crucial. And the other is also building trust, you know, and building trust and agency and helping people realize that, you know best, and I will support you however I can, but you know that you actually have the room to make the decisions, to actually, you know, have agency to act however you see fit. So I do think that, you know, trust building, agency building, and then obviously having the right fit, having the right person is key. And even with our work in general, you know, I do think that one of the biggest lessons that I've learned on a personal level is how important team is. And, you know, when you find the right people and the right mix of people, things start like flowing and things start falling into place. So I definitely wouldn't understate how important, you know, the right mix of people actually is.
Thanks, Jehane. I was wondering as well, for our audience watching, if you could share some other tools that you use in Farms Not Arms that helps you to be so adaptable within such a challenging context.
I don't know if there's like one specific tool, but I do think that it's the kind of concept or idea of always being like iterative and iterating and not thinking of everything as just like linear, but realizing that sometimes you have to go back and reassess and to really, you know, adapt and not really have very rigid, let's say, milestones that you have to get to by a certain date, but more always keeping the bigger picture in mind and the north like guiding star and knowing, okay, like this is what we're meant to achieve, but sometimes there might be different ways to get there based on what happens on the ground. So I do think that for me, you know, the main concept is like acting locally and making sure that you, especially in the case of larger organizations, making sure that you're not so removed with all the like bureaucracy or the different steps or different processes that you become a bit removed from the local reality. And this is why I think that it's always important to have this local voice and feedback that feeds, you know, the steps. So in a way, when you're planning what you're going to be doing, instead of just thinking of milestone, to always have this local voice be present and be the guiding process, you know. So I think like using, I mean, there's a lot of tools out there for co-creation, you know, so I would say this it could happen as organically and as informally as possible, but then you can also have like more structured co-creation workshops, co-creation, even like testing and piloting things locally. So those are some things like that could be used. But I think it's more this ethos and principle of always putting the local first.
Thank you so much. I love that you were mentioning about vision being the guiding force and always coming back to this guiding star of your vision as an organization. What is it that you want to achieve? And earlier, Jehane, you mentioned about this tension that many people notice when they're working on contexts of displacement, this tension that may exist sometimes between host communities and people who are displaced or who may be refugees. Could you tell us a bit about how you've helped to bridge this gap between host communities and refugee communities in your work?
So for us, actually, one of the ways, as I said, like having the local communities guide the process, the insight of bridging the gap between the local and the refugee communities actually came from the refugee communities. So one of the first design sprints that I did in the Beqaa, which is the agricultural valley of Lebanon, where we're working, was refugee only. And during that design sprint, a lot of the refugees pointed out that if we have, like a refugee-only farm, there would be some tensions, and they would actually be scared that, some people would attack it or it wouldn't be that safe. So that was a starting point that really helped us realize that this should be a major pillar in our work. And the way that we target it right now is that we are quite inclusive in how people work on the farm, who works there. We're very open to a lot of different people, but we're also quite wary that we can't really do this huge behavioral change and mentality change for everyone. So in a way, we're creating the space that's inclusive, and more people are being attracted to it. Obviously, if someone is super anti-refugees, they're not really going to resonate that much with it. And I think that it's very difficult for us personally as a farm to change that. But at the same time, we are attracting people who are maybe like open to and creating the space for people to come together, to realize that, we're all very similar. It doesn't really matter what status you are. You're still, especially, we have a lot of cultural similarities and all of that. So one is creating the space, and then also communication and like putting things out there on our social media and word of mouth, having events, where you see like a diverse group of people coming together. So more and more people are let's say, attracted to it, or resonate with the idea. And I do think, it's really sometimes at least like in Lebanon, the host communities and the refugee communities don't really interact that much unless, it's sometimes the interactions are more negative than positive. So I would say creating the spaces where people can come together and then seeing which kind of people come is important as a starting point to bridging that gap.
Thank you so much, Jehane, for joining us and being our last guest of the season. Really sharing your tools and your experience and your perspective is so valued. So thank you so much, and for all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Jehane. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you. And so, like we have had in every episode of this Designing Regenerative Change series, we want to throw it back to you, our wonderful audience, and give you an opportunity to put this design step into practice and help deepen into this process. So just like the wonderful Jehane was talking about, we think it's really interesting to see this design process as circular, as ever-changing, ever-growing. It doesn't end here. It helps to go back to what you have learned throughout this process and think, how does this continue to change and continue to grow? You can think almost as your project idea as iterative. It's always, you can learn from what you've done and iterate and change and update your work to continue growing and continue evolving the work. So something that we've done is we've put together some of the activities from the past season of Designing Regenerative Change series. So you may have joined along with us with some of the activities that we did on each webinar. So we've put together a document that you can see here, which explores some of these questions that we've looked at and invites you to think, okay, well, I've gone through this process. What have I noticed? And what have I seen change? For example, with your vision that you began this process with, what's changed with your vision? What have you achieved toward this vision as this process has been going on? And how might you update or change or evolve your vision as you go forward?
Similarly, with the mapping step, maybe more resources have become available, or maybe some needs that you have identified, some progress has been made towards that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's always good to look back and kind of refine and fine tune. And as we've especially discussed in this episode, the context that we're working in, nothing is stagnant, nothing is remaining the same. So even whether it's within your work or just from the outside, things are always changing. So refining your plan, there can always be kind of new, maybe your perspective has changed, or maybe the practicalities of what's around you has changed.
Exactly.
So it's good to take it as a reflective process every now and then.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're right, especially to do with mapping, if our context is always changing, and because our context is always changing, this mapping process is almost continual, isn't it? It's thinking what's continuously happening in my context that affects my work, and maybe continually mapping that will help with your process and your project as well. So, and the list goes on with this process, as we go through to the design phase and implementation, design, what is it that actually needs to maybe change or adapt as we go forward, given your changing climate and changing context? How do we implement that? What's the plan for putting this into action? And the reflection process of continually reflecting and learning from what you've done. Yeah. So we invite you to go through this process of reflection and think, how does this help you adapt your work to what is always changing? And feel free to use this tool as often as you like and share this tool as well.
And another invitation that I'll add to that, especially if you're joining us from outside of the Realliance network, is especially in context of crises and contexts where you need to be quickly responding and adaptable. We know that having a network and having resources and allies around you is just incredibly valuable, and that's something that we try and facilitate a space for within the Realliance network. So you're very welcome to join. Have a look at realliance.org/join and join our network. We have over 250 member organisations all over the world in over 60 countries. And yeah, we're working to really create these spaces where community level responders, first responders, and people with expertise in various regenerative methodologies can be connected and freely share knowledge, resources, experiences, strength, solidarity. You're very, very welcome to join us.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing you there. And I think this is a good place to test some of these processes that we've been learning about, and check in with your fellow Realliance members when you become a member, to see how this process has been going for you, because it doesn't end here. The cycle continues and your projects will continue evolving and growing. And of course, just like Jackie said, it's important to lean on your peers and continue learning from people who are implementing similar ideas and projects around the world. It's an amazing wealth of knowledge that we have the pleasure of connecting to from wonderful minds around the world. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, while the designing never ends. This series has come to an end. So do feel free to go back over the previous episodes. But yes, it's an end to the series from James and I. Realliance is always putting on events and webinars and meetings. So have a look at realliance.org/events to find out how you can engage with us in future.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure learning with you all. And thank you so much for joining this series. We look forward to connecting with you as part of the network and at the next events. So thank you so much, Jackie, for going through this process with me too.
Thank you to you, James. Thank you to all of our members who spoke and shared their experiences. And thank you to everybody who commented, who joined in the live chats, and who just watched. It's been wonderful having this space with everybody.
Yeah, so hopefully connect with you all soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Happy designing.